I have been woken up by a phone at 3 in the morning more times than I can count. For 40 years, a call at that hour meant one thing. Someone's heart had stopped, or was about to, and I had approximately 11 minutes to scrub in before the outcome became irreversible. You train yourself, over decades of that kind of work, to skip the part where your brain needs a moment to understand where it is. Your eyes open, and your feet are already moving, and the thinking happens on the way, not before it. So when my phone vibrates at 3:17 on a Tuesday morning, and I see my granddaughter's name on the screen, I am sitting upright before the second pulse. Brooke is 16. She is also the reason I have a second phone line that I have never mentioned to anyone in her household, a number I gave her 8 months ago, quietly, after a Sunday visit during which I noticed she flinched when her stepfather's car pulled into the driveway. Not dramatically, the way a person flinches when they have learned that certain sounds mean certain things. I noticed it, I filed it, and I said nothing that afternoon. Instead, I gave her a number only she had, and I told her it didn't matter what time it was. She used it tonight. I answer on the first ring. Her voice is low, controlled in the particular way that teenagers control their voices when they have been crying long enough that the crying is finished, and what's left is just the information. "Grandma, I'm at the hospital. My arm. He broke my arm. But he told the doctor I fell. And Mom." A pause that contains more than a pause should be able to hold. Mom stayed by his side. I ask one question. "Which hospital?" "St. Augustine, the ER. I'm leaving now. Don't say anything else to anyone until I get there." She says okay in the voice of someone who has just been told they are allowed to stop holding something very heavy. I hang up before she can hear anything in my silence that would worry her further. I am dressed in 4 minutes. Not because I am rushing. Rushing is for people who haven't done this before. I am efficient. There is a difference. The beige leather jacket I keep on the hook by the bedroom door because I have always believed in knowing where the things you need in emergencies actually are. Keys in the right pocket. Phone in the left. I am in the car before 3:22. Here is what I am thinking as I drive through the empty streets of Charleston towards St. Augustine Medical Center. I am thinking about the notebook on my phone. The one I started in October, the night Brooke appeared at my door unannounced with a bruise on her forearm and a story about a bicycle that had the right number of details in all the wrong places. I didn't push that night. I treated the bruise. I asked the questions a grandmother asks, and I listened to the story she had prepared. And then, after she left, I opened a new note on my phone and I wrote down the date, the location of the bruise, the exact words she used, and the 3 specific reasons the story didn't hold. I have 41 entries since October. I am also thinking about James Whitaker, who I operated alongside for 11 years before I moved to Roper Hospital, who is the attending orthopedic surgeon at St. Augustine on Tuesday nights, and who will understand, the moment he sees me walk through those doors, exactly why I am there. James is a good doctor. More importantly, he is a precise man. He does not file things incorrectly, and he does not ignore what his instincts are telling him. I am counting on both of those qualities in approximately 7 minutes. I pull into the hospital parking structure at 3:39. I find a space on the second level, turn off the engine, and sit for exactly 4 seconds. Not because I need to collect myself, because in 40 years of surgery, I learned that 4 seconds of absolute stillness before you enter the room is the difference between walking in as the person who controls the situation and walking in as someone reacting to it. I get out of the car. I know what I am walking into. I know what I am going to do. And I know, with the particular certainty that only comes from a lifetime of entering rooms where everything has already gone wrong, that I am not too late. I am, in fact, exactly on time. Let me tell you what I actually knew, and when I knew it. Because there is a version of this story where a grandmother is blindsided, where the signs were invisible, where no one could have seen it coming, where the ending is a miracle born from luck and good timing. That version is easier to tell. It is also not true, and I have spent 40 years in medicine developing a profound allergy to comfortable fictions. The truth is that I saw Marcus Webb clearly the first time I met him. That was 14 months ago at a dinner Diane hosted to introduce him to the family. He arrived 12 minutes late, which he explained with a story that was slightly too detailed to be spontaneous. He pulled out Diane's chair before she reached it, not as a gesture toward her, I noticed, but as a demonstration for the room. He asked me, within the first 20 minutes of conversation, whether I still maintained hospital privileges, whether I had a financial advisor, and whether I had thought about what retirement looked like in terms of the house. He framed each question as curiosity. I registered each one as inventory. Diane looked happy in the specific way that people look happy when they have worked very hard to look happy, and the effort is almost invisible, but not quite. I didn't say anything that night. He hadn't done anything I could point to. He had been slightly too smooth, slightly too interested in the wrong things, slightly too positioned between Diane and everyone else at the table. None of that is a crime. All of it is a data point. I drove home and I kept my own counsel. I want to be precise about Diane because she is not a simple part of this story, and I will not make her one. My daughter is 51 years old. She is intelligent, genuinely intelligent, the kind that showed up early and never required encouragement. She put herself through her master's program while raising Brooke alone after a divorce that would have leveled most people. She built a career in urban planning that she was proud of, and rightly so. She is also the person who, at 9 years old, once cried for 45 minutes because she found an injured bird in the backyard and couldn't determine whether she had done enough to save it. She loves with her whole body. It is her finest quality and her greatest vulnerability, and Marcus Webb identified it within approximately 30 seconds of meeting her. I know this because I have watched people like him before, not personally, but in medicine. You encounter patients whose partners come to every appointment, answer every question before the patient can, and reframe every concern as an overreaction. After a while, you recognize the architecture. The way control is built slowly, in small increments, each one individually defensible, collectively suffocating. I recognize the architecture in Marcus. I just didn't know yet how far along the construction was. October was when I stopped registering and started documenting. Brooke appeared at my door on a Sunday afternoon without calling ahead, which she had never done before. She had ridden her bike, 12 blocks, which she knew I would consider the exercise rather than the logistics. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt in 68-degree weather. When she reached for her glass of water at my kitchen table, the sleeve rode up slightly, and I saw the bruise before she adjusted it. It was a contact bruise, not from a fall, not from a bicycle. The shape and coloring were inconsistent with impact against a surface. After 40 years of looking at bodies, I know the difference between how skin responds to a hard edge and how it responds to a hand. She told me she fell off the bike on the way over. She gave me the specific block, the specific crack in the sidewalk. She had prepared the story carefully, which told me she had been preparing stories for longer than this one. I treated the bruise. I asked the questions a concerned grandmother asks. I did not tell her what I had observed, because telling her would have accomplished exactly one thing, putting her on alert that I knew, which would get back to Marcus, which would make her less safe, not more. When she left, I opened a new note on my phone. October 14th. Brooke. Unannounced visit. Bruise, left forearm. 4 centimeters. Contact pattern inconsistent with reported bicycle fall. Long sleeves, warm weather. Story prepared in advance. Level of detail suggests rehearsal. Did not confront. Watching. That was entry number 1. Over the next 8 months, I built a record the way I built surgical cases, methodically, without gaps, without interpretation beyond what the evidence supported. I noted the visit in November when Brooke came for Thanksgiving and barely spoke at the table, which was new. Brooke had always been the loudest person in any room she entered. I noted that Marcus answered 2 questions that were directed at Diane before Diane had finished opening her mouth. I noted that when I asked Brooke to help me in the kitchen, Marcus stood up also, and only sat back down when Diane put her hand on his arm. I noted the December phone call when Diane told me they were simplifying the holidays, which meant Brooke would not be staying at my house for the week between Christmas and New Year's, as she had every year since she was 4. I did not argue. I noted the call, the date, the exact phrase she used, and the flatness in her voice when she said it. I noted January, when Brooke stopped responding to my texts within a day. Response time stretched to 3 days, then 5. The messages themselves changed, shorter, more neutral, the particular blankness of someone composing messages they know will be read by someone else first. In February, I gave her the second phone number. I picked a Tuesday afternoon when I knew Marcus was traveling for work and invited Brooke for lunch, directly, not through Diane. She came. She ate 2 portions of the chicken soup I make that she has asked for since she was 7. Toward the end of the meal, I slid a piece of paper across the table with a number on it. "This is a line only you have," I said. "No one else knows it exists. You never have to use it. But if you ever need to reach me and you can't use your regular phone, this is how." She looked at the paper for a moment. She didn't ask why I was giving it to her. She folded it carefully and put it in the small interior pocket of her jacket. Not her bag, not her back pocket. The interior pocket. The one harder to find. She understood exactly what I was giving her and exactly why. We finished lunch. We talked about her history class and a book she was reading and whether I thought she should try out for the spring play. I drove her home. I watched her walk through the front door and waited until it closed behind her before I pulled out of the driveway. Entry 41 was written 5 days before that 3:17 call. It read, "Brooke, Sunday visit, restricted to 2 hours. Makeup heavier than usual around jaw, left side." When I mentioned it, she said new foundation, different coverage. Possible. Also, possible not. Documenting. I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened at that hospital. I did not walk through those emergency room doors as a grandmother reacting to a crisis. I walked in as a woman who had been preparing for this moment for 8 months, hoping she would never need to use any of it, and completely ready to use all of it. There is a difference, and that difference is what changed everything that happened next. James Whittaker sees me before I reach the nurse's station. I know this because I see him see me. The specific moment when recognition crosses a person's face and something underneath it shifts. He is standing at the station with a resident and a charge nurse, reviewing something on a tablet, and when the automatic doors open and I walk through, he looks up with the automatic reflex of someone who has spent decades tracking movement in peripheral vision. He hands the tablet to the resident without looking at it. "Give us the room," he says. Not loudly. He doesn't need to be loud. In 30 years of surgery, James Whittaker developed the particular voice of someone who does not expect to be questioned, because he rarely is. The resident and the nurse move without comment. James walks to meet me halfway across the floor. He looks like a man who has been carrying something for the last 2 hours and has just identified the person he can hand it to. "Dorothy! James, tell me where she is and tell me what you filed." He looks at me for 1 beat. I haven't filed anything yet. I keep my expression exactly where it is. Why not? Because the mother corroborated the stepfather's story. The girl refused treatment twice while he was in the room, and I wanted to know whether she had family coming before I put anything permanent on record. He pauses. I had my charge nurse let her use her personal phone about 90 minutes ago. I look at him for a moment. 40 years ago, James and I were residents together at this hospital. I have seen him work under conditions that would reduce most surgeons to guesswork. He is not a man who does things without reasons, and the reason he just gave me is the correct one. "Thank you," I say. "She's in Bay 4. I cleared the parents to the family waiting area 40 minutes ago and told them the evaluation was ongoing. He lowers his voice slightly, not from uncertainty, but from precision. Dorothy, the fracture pattern on that radius is not consistent with a fall downstairs. It's consistent with forced hyperextension. I've seen it before. So have I say. The stepfather is in the waiting area. He's been loud. The mother hasn't said anything. I know. What do you need from me? File the report. Complete, accurate, everything you observed. Include the inconsistency between the stated mechanism and the fracture pattern. I hold his eyes. I need it on record before anything else happens tonight. He nods once. Already drafted. I was waiting to confirm she had someone. She has someone. He picks up the chart from the station counter and walks toward his office. I walk toward Bay 4. Brooke is sitting on the exam table with her back against the wall and her right knee pulled to her chest. The left arm immobilized in a temporary splint, the position of someone who has made themselves as small as possible in a room and is only now, very carefully, beginning to uncurl. She looks up when I push the curtain aside. The sound she makes is not a word. It is the sound of a month's worth of held breath, releasing all at once, and I have to work to keep my face composed, because composure is what she needs from me right now, not the thing I feel when I look at her sitting there at 16 years old in a hospital bay at 4 in the morning. I pull the chair close to the exam table and sit down. Not standing over her, beside her, at her level. Same height, same plane. I'm here, I say. You're safe. Nobody comes in this room without my permission. She nods. Her eyes are dry. She is past the stage of tears, which tells me she has been managing this alone for longer than tonight. Can you tell me what happened? Start from this evening. She tells me. I listen the way I listen to patient histories, completely, without steering, without reaction that would cause her to edit herself. I let her find her own order. The argument that started over dinner. The specific phrase she used that Marcus decided was disrespectful. The moment in the hallway. Her mother in the doorway. The drive to the hospital with Marcus explaining, in a calm and organized voice, exactly what Brooke had done to cause the fall. She tells me her mother sat in the front seat and did not turn around once. When she finishes, I ask 3 questions. Specific, clinical, without judgment in the tone. I need dates. I need whether this has happened before in a way that left marks, and I need to know whether anyone at her school has noticed anything. Her answers take 11 minutes. I do not interrupt once. When she is done, I put my hand over hers, carefully, away from the injured arm, and I tell her the truth, which is the only thing I have ever found genuinely useful in a crisis. You did everything right tonight. Calling me, keeping the phone hidden, telling me not to say anything until you got here. That was smart. That was exactly right. She looks at me. What happens now? Now I make some calls, and while I do that, no one gets near you. That's not a hope. That's a fact. She holds my eyes for a moment, and I see in her face the particular expression of a person deciding whether to believe that the situation is actually under control. It is a look I recognize from pre-op, when patients are deciding whether to trust the hands that are about to open them. Okay, she says. I squeeze her hand once. Then I step outside the curtain and I go to work. The first call is to Patricia Osei, the charge nurse on this floor, who I have known for 22 years and who appears at my elbow approximately 30 seconds after I step into the hallway, which tells me James briefed her. Patricia. What's the situation in the family waiting area? The stepfather asked 3 times to speak with the attending. Twice I told him the evaluation was in progress. 3rd time, he raised his voice. I documented all 3 interactions with timestamps. She says this with the specific satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting for an opportunity to be useful and is now being asked to be exactly that. The mother hasn't spoken. Keep him in that waiting area. If he attempts to enter the clinical area, you call security and you call me simultaneously. already have security on standby. I look at her. You prepared before I got here. Dr. Whitaker told us who was coming, she says simply. Then she goes back to her station. The second call is to Renata Vasquez, the hospital's on-call social worker, whose number I have had in my phone for 4 years because I spent 2 of my last years before retirement consulting on a hospital task force for elder and child abuse protocol. And Renata was on that task force, and I made a point of remembering everyone who was serious about the work. She answers on the second ring. It is 4:17 in the morning. Renata, it's Dorothy Calloway. I'm at St. Augustine with a 16-year-old, suspected physical abuse by a step-parent, fracture inconsistent with reported mechanism, mother corroborating the abuser's story. The attending has a report drafted. I need you here. A 2-second pause. I'm 20 minutes out. I'll be here. The third call I do not make from the hallway. I walk to the far end of the corridor, the quiet stretch near the stairwell where the lighting is lower and the foot traffic is nothing. And I stand at the window that looks out over the parking structure, and I dial Frances Aldridge. Frances is my attorney. She has been my attorney for 15 years. She is 63 years old. She lives 12 minutes from this hospital, and she answers on the third ring with a voice that is alert in a way that suggests she was not entirely asleep. Dorothy, what time is it? 4:20. Frances, I need emergency temporary custody of my granddaughter. Tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest. I have a medical report being filed as we speak, a social worker on the way, and documentation going back 8 months that I've been keeping on my phone. I pause. I need to know what you need from me to make this happen before Marcus Webb walks out of this hospital a free man and goes back to that house. Silence of exactly 4 seconds, which is Frances processing and not Frances hesitating. In 15 years, I have never seen Frances Aldridge hesitate. Send me everything on your phone right now, every note, every date, every observation. I'll review it on the way. On the way? I'm already getting dressed, she says. I'll be there in 35 minutes. She arrives in 31. While I wait for Frances and Renata, I do one more thing. I go back to Bay 4, pull the curtain closed behind me, sit back down beside Brooke, and I ask her, quietly, without preamble, whether she would be willing to speak to a social worker when she arrives. I explain what a social worker does. I explain that whatever she says will be documented exactly as she says it, and that she controls what she shares and what she doesn't. I explain that this is not about getting anyone in trouble tonight. It is about building a record that will protect her going forward. She listens to all of it. Then she says, "Will you be outside the curtain?" "The whole time." "Okay," she says. "I'll talk to her." I nod. Then I say the thing I have been calculating how to say since I pulled out of my parking space at 3:22 in the morning. "Brooke, your mother is in the waiting area." Her face does something complicated. Not surprise. She knew. Something else. The specific expression of a person receiving confirmation of something they were hoping wasn't true. "She didn't come find me," Brooke says. "It is not a question. Not yet." She looks down at her immobilized arm for a moment. When she looks back up, her face has resolved into something quieter and older than 16. "Is she okay?" And there it is. The thing about Brooke that has always made me love her with a specific fierceness. Even here, even now, her first instinct is to ask about someone else. "I don't know yet," I tell her honestly. "But that's not your job to figure out tonight. Tonight, your only job is to tell the truth to the people who are going to help you. Can you do that?" "Yes," she says, without hesitation. "Good." I step back outside the curtain. Frances rounds the corner at the end of the hallway, coat over her arm, reading glasses already on, phone in hand, pulling up my forwarded notes before she has finished walking toward me. Renata emerges from the elevator 30 seconds later, badge clipped to her jacket, expression calibrated to the specific neutral of someone trained to enter difficult rooms without escalating them. I look at both of them. "Here's what we have," I say, and I tell them everything, in order, without gaps. In 40 years of surgery, I learned that the first 10 minutes after you open the chest determine the next 3 hours. You either establish control of the field immediately, or you spend the rest of the operation recovering from not having done it. I established control of this field at 3:39 a.m. in a hospital parking structure, in 4 seconds of stillness before I got out of the car. Everything that follows is just the operation proceeding as planned. Renata Vasquez has been a hospital social worker for 16 years. I know this because I asked her 4 years ago on that task force how long she had been doing the work, and she told me 16 years with the tone of someone who has never once considered doing anything else. She is 44 years old, carries a notepad with a specific brand of pen clipped to the cover, and has the particular stillness of someone who has walked into enough difficult rooms that the difficulty itself no longer disrupts her equilibrium. She spends 40 minutes with Brooke. I stand outside the curtain for all 40 of them. Frances sits in the chair at the end of the hallway reviewing my notes on her phone, occasionally making small sounds that in 15 years I have learned to interpret. A short exhale means she has found something useful. Silence means she is reading something carefully. A quiet means she is already thinking 2 steps ahead of whatever she just read. At the 20-minute mark, she looks up and says, without preamble, "Dorothy, entry 37, the one about the makeup. November. Heavier coverage along the jaw, left side. You wrote, possible, also possible not. That equivocation is actually useful. It demonstrates you documented what you observed without overstating it. A judge will read that as credible." "That's why I wrote it that way," I say. She looks at me over her reading glasses for a moment. 41 entries in 8 months. Consistent timestamps. No gaps. "I kept surgical notes for 40 years, I say. The habit doesn't turn off." She goes back to reading. I go back to watching the curtain. Renata emerges at 5:03. She pulls the curtain closed behind her and walks 2 steps toward me before she speaks, which tells me she wants distance from the bay before she says what she is about to say. Her account is consistent, detailed, and internally coherent, she says, in the measured language of someone who has learned to present findings before conclusions. She describes a pattern of escalating physical incidents over approximately 14 months, beginning with what she characterizes as isolated events and progressing in frequency and severity. Tonight was not the first time. It was the first time she sought outside help. I absorb this without expression. How many documented incidents does she recall? 7 that left visible marks. Possibly more that she is not yet ready to name. Renata pauses. She also described a specific pattern of isolation: phone access restricted, school activities monitored, visits to extended family systematically reduced. She identified the onset as approximately 2 months after the marriage. Beside me, Frances has put down her phone. She is listening. She presented as credible, Renata continues. No rehearsed quality, no inconsistencies, no prompting required. She self-corrected twice when her memory on specific dates was uncertain, which is consistent with honest recollection rather than fabricated account. She looks at me directly. "I'm filing a mandatory report to Child Protective Services. Tonight. The notification goes out within the hour." "Good," I say. "There will be a CPS investigator assigned, likely by tomorrow morning. They'll want to interview Brooke separately, and they'll want to visit the home." "The home," Frances says, "not to either of us particularly. We need to make sure she is not returned to that home before any of that happens." "That's your department," Renata says, with the slight edge of professional respect between 2 people who understand exactly where one jurisdiction ends and another begins. Frances is already picking up her phone. 2 things happen in the next hour that I did not plan for, which in my experience is precisely the number of unplanned things that happen in any well-organized situation. The first is Marcus. At 5:21, Patricia appears at my end of the hallway with the specific expression she uses when she is delivering bad news in a controlled way, which I know because I have seen it twice tonight already, and I am beginning to catalog her vocabulary. He's requesting to speak with someone in administration, she says. He says his stepdaughter is being held without his consent, and that the hospital is interfering in a family matter. I look at her. What did administration say? I haven't contacted administration. I told him I would pass along his request and that someone would be in touch. She pauses. I have not been in touch. Good. What's his affect? Controlled. Measured. The kind of measured that takes effort. She holds my eyes. He's been on his phone. Frequently. I file that. Is Diane still in the waiting area? Yes, she hasn't moved. She hasn't spoken to him in approximately 40 minutes. They're on opposite sides of the room. I think about that for a moment. Opposite sides of the room at 5 in the morning, after a night like this one, is information. Keep documenting his requests, his exact language, the timestamps, I say. Everything he says or does in that waiting area goes into the record. Already is, she says, and goes back to her station. The second unplanned thing is the call from James at 5:44. I step away to take it. Dorothy, I sent the fracture imaging to a colleague at MUSC for a second read. Thomas Park, pediatric orthopedics. He consults on abuse cases for the county. He confirmed my assessment. Forced hyperextension, almost certainly manual. The angle is inconsistent with any fall mechanism. James pauses. He also noted a healed fracture in the same limb, distal ulna, approximately 6 to 9 months old. It did not receive medical treatment. I stand very still. She didn't tell me about a previous fracture, I say. She may not have known it was a fracture, or she may not have been permitted to seek treatment. His voice is carefully neutral. I'm adding it to the report. Thomas will provide a written consultation by morning. Thank you, James. Dorothy. A pause. I should have called CPS in the first hour, before I knew you were coming. You kept her safe until I got here, I say. That's what mattered. A short silence. Give Brooke my best. I hang up and stand in the hallway for a moment with the phone in my hand and the information about a 6-month-old fracture that healed without treatment sitting in my chest, where I intend to leave it until I have time to feel it properly. Not now. Now I go back to Frances. I find her at the small conference room that Patricia unlocked for us at some point in the last hour. A narrow room with a table, 4 chairs, and a whiteboard that someone has written a medication dosage calculation on in green marker and not erased. Frances is on her second call. I can tell from her posture that it is going well, which with Frances means she is completely still and her pen is moving. She finishes the call and looks up. I reached Judge Harmon's clerk, she says. At 5:40 in the morning. His clerk has a daughter who was in a situation like this one 12 years ago, Frances says, with the precision of someone who has maintained professional relationships across decades for exactly these moments. He takes these calls. She sets down her pen. Here is where we are. Emergency temporary custody is petitionable on the basis of the mandatory CPS report that Renata is filing, the medical documentation James is filing, and your 8 months of observational records. The combination of all 3 is what makes this viable tonight rather than next week. What do we need? I need one more thing. I need a statement, not a formal deposition, just a written statement, from someone outside this family who has observed Brooke during this period and can attest to behavioral changes consistent with the documented pattern. She looks at me. The school. I have a contact, the principal. Can you reach her at 6 in the morning? I can, I say. And I can, because Andrea Simmons gave me her personal number 2 years ago after I delivered a health presentation to her staff, and she pulled me aside afterward to ask about resources for a teacher who she believed was in a difficult home situation. We have spoken 4 times since then. She is exactly the kind of person who answers at 6 in the morning when the caller ID is someone she trusts. I call her from the conference room while Frances listens. Andrea answers on the 4th ring, voice careful and awake. "Dorothy, is everything all right?" "No," I say. "I need to talk to you about Brooke, and I need you to tell me honestly whether your staff has documented anything about her this year." A pause that is not hesitation, but recognition. "How much time do you have?" "As much as you need." What Andrea tells me over the next 22 minutes fills in sections of the timeline I had gaps in. Her guidance counselor, a woman named Ms. Okafor, had a conversation with Brooke in September that Brooke ended abruptly when she saw Marcus's car in the pickup line. Ms. Okafor documented the conversation in her case notes because Brooke had seemed on the verge of saying something specific and then visibly shut down. She had flagged it internally, but had not reached the threshold for mandatory reporting because Brooke had not disclosed anything directly. There was a creative writing assignment in November, the one Andrea mentioned the teacher had kept, in which Brooke wrote a fictional story about a girl who made herself invisible at home. The teacher had kept it not because of any single explicit line, but because of the cumulative texture of the piece. It read, the teacher had told Andrea, like someone describing something real through the thinnest possible layer of fiction. And in February, Brooke had been absent for 4 days following what the family reported as a stomach illness. The timing, Andrea said. She had noted this in her own records without knowing why, just that something about it registered, aligned with a bruise I had logged in entry 26. "Andrea," I say, "I need a written statement of everything you just told me. Not the assignments themselves, those can come later. Just what your staff observed, what was documented, and when. Can you have something to my attorney by 8 this morning?" "I can have it by 7:30, she says. "Dorothy, is she okay?" "She will be," I say. And this time, I mean it in the present tense, not the future. At 6:45, 2 officers from the Charleston PD arrive at the hospital in response to Renata's CPS notification, which triggered an automatic police referral under state protocol for physical abuse of a minor. I meet them in the corridor before they reach the waiting area. The senior officer is a man named Garrett, late 40s, writes everything down, asks questions in a specific order that tells me he has done this before and has a system. His partner is younger, takes photographs of everything, says almost nothing. I give Garrett my name, my relationship to Brooke, my medical background, and a concise summary of the timeline. 8 months of documented observations, tonight's injury, James's report, the second read from MUSC, the healed previous fracture, and Renata's intake findings. I give him the information in the order a report should be written, because in my experience, the easier you make it for law enforcement to do their job, the better law enforcement does their job. He writes everything down. When I finish, he looks up. "You've been documenting this since October," he says. "Yes." "On your own initiative, before tonight?" "Yes." He holds my eyes for a moment in the way of someone reassessing a situation. "Ma'am, most family members come to us after the fact with a feeling. You're coming to us with a case file." "I'm a physician," I say. "I document what I observe. It's not a strategy. It's a habit." He nods once, slowly. "We'll need to speak with your granddaughter. My attorney is here. She'll coordinate that with you. Brooke has already spoken with the social worker and is prepared to speak with you on the condition that I remain accessible outside the room." "That's standard," he says. "I know," I say. "I've read the protocol." He almost smiles. Almost. At 7:04, Frances receives confirmation from Judge Harmon's clerk that the emergency custody petition has been received and is under review. At 7:19, Andrea's written statement arrives in Frances's email, 3 pages, time-stamped, with specific dates, specific staff names, and specific observations. Frances reads it in 4 minutes, makes 2 notes, and looks up at me. "This is enough," she says. "Combined with everything else, this is enough." I look at her. In 15 years, I have heard Frances say, "This is enough," exactly 3 times before today. Each time she was right. "How long?" I ask. "Judge Harmon reviews it personally. His clerk says he's in the office by 8. She checks her watch. "Less than an hour." I nod. I walk back to Bay 4. I pull the curtain aside. Brooke is awake, sitting in the same position against the wall, but she has accepted the blanket that someone, Patricia, I suspect, left folded at the end of the exam table. She looks at me when I enter. "You've been out there a long time," she says. "I've been working," I say. "What happens now?" I sit down in the chair. I look at her directly, the way I looked at Patience when the surgery had gone well and the news was genuinely good and I had earned the right to deliver it. "Now we wait for a judge to sign a piece of paper," I say. "And then you come home with me." She is quiet for a moment. "What about Mom?" "Your mom has some things to figure out," I say. "That's not your job. Your job right now is to rest." She looks at me for a long moment. Then she slides down slightly on the exam table, adjusts the blanket with her good arm, and closes her eyes. She is asleep in 4 minutes. I stay in the chair. Frances calls me at 8:14. I am standing at the coffee machine at the end of the hallway, the one that produces something that resembles coffee the way a diagram resembles a living organ. And I answer before the screen finishes lighting up. "The judge signed," she says. 2 words that rearrange everything that comes after them. Emergency temporary custody. 90 days, effective immediately. You are Brooke's legal guardian as of 8:09 this morning. Marcus Webb has been formally notified that he is prohibited from any contact with the minor. Diane has been notified as a secondary party. She retains parental rights, but all decisions regarding Brooke's welfare during the custody period require your authorization. I set down the coffee I was not going to drink anyway. "Frances, thank you." "Don't thank me yet. 90 days goes fast. We need to build the permanent case in parallel. This buys us time. It doesn't finish the work." "I know," I say. "What do I do first?" "Tell your granddaughter," she says. "Everything else can wait 10 minutes. I pull the curtain aside quietly. Brooke is awake. She has been awake for a while, I suspect, in the way that people are awake before they let themselves be seen awake, holding on to the last few minutes before the world requires something of them. She looks at me. I sit down in the chair. I tell her simply, in the same direct language I have used with Patience for 40 years, because Brooke has earned directness, and I have never believed that protecting people from information protects them from anything. A judge signed an emergency custody order at 8:09 this morning. You're coming home with me. Marcus cannot contact you. That's not a plan. It's a legal fact, as of 45 minutes ago. She stares at me for a moment. 45 minutes ago, she repeats. I didn't want to tell you until it was done, I say. I don't deal in maybes. Something moves across her face. Not one thing, several things in rapid succession. The way a person processes news that they needed to hear and had stopped letting themselves want. She presses her lips together. Her chin does the thing that chins do when a person is deciding whether to cry and then deciding not to. She decides not to. Okay, she says. Then, after a moment, can I have real coffee before we leave? The stuff here tastes like hot cardboard. I look at her for one beat. There is a place 2 blocks from my house that opens at 8:30, I say. You can have whatever you want. For the first time since I walked through that curtain at 4 a.m, she smiles. It is brief, and it is tired, and it is completely real. That is the moment I allow myself to feel the thing I have been storing since 3:17 a.m. Not performing it. I don't perform things. Just acknowledging it internally, the way you acknowledge the end of a long surgery when the chest is closed and the patient is stable and you stand for a moment in the scrub room before the next thing begins. She is safe. She is with me. The order is signed. Everything else is work, and I know how to do work. We leave the hospital at 9:02. Before I go, I stop at the nurse's station and find Patricia. I thank her, specifically by action, not generally. I name the things she did that mattered. The standby security, the documentation of Marcus's requests, the blanket she left in Bay 4 at some point in the night when no one was watching. She nods once in the way of someone who did not do it for the thanks, but appreciates that it was noticed. I find James in the corridor outside his office. He is finishing a call and sees me coming and ends it. It went through, I say. He exhales. Good. Your report made it possible. The second read from Thomas Park was the piece that made it irrefutable. He's thorough, James says. Dorothy. He pauses. How's Diane? It is the question I have been carrying since Patricia told me, hours ago, that Diane and Marcus had moved to opposite sides of the waiting room. I don't know yet, I say honestly, but I'm going to find out. I find Diane where Patricia said she was, in the corner of the family waiting area, nearest the window, in the chair she has apparently not left for 6 hours. Marcus is gone. Garrett's partner told me an hour ago that Marcus left voluntarily after being informed of the custody order and the no-contact provision. He left without incident, which the officer noted with the specific surprise of someone who had been prepared for more. Diane looks up when I walk in. She looks like someone who has been awake for a long time and has spent that time in a particular kind of silence. Not peaceful silence, the silence of someone sitting inside a decision they haven't made yet. I sit down across from her, not beside her this time, across, because this conversation requires her to see my face. I do not tell her what Brooke told me. That is Brooke's account, and Brooke controls who receives it and when. What I tell Diane is what I can tell her from my own position. That I have had an emergency custody order signed, that Brooke is coming home with me today, and that the legal process now in motion is not something either of us initiated. It was initiated by a mandatory reporting system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Diane listens. Her hands are in her lap. She does not look away. When I finish, she says, I should have called you. I look at her for a moment. There are many things I could say to that. I choose the one that is most useful. You can call me now, I say. That option is still open. It will stay open. But what you do with it is your decision, not mine. She looks at her hands. Is she okay? She's going to be okay, I say. She already ordered coffee. Diane makes a sound that is not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and is, I think, the most honest sound I have heard her make in 14 months. I stand up. I put my card on the table in front of her, not my old hospital card, my personal one, with my cell number. The same number I gave Brooke 8 months ago. When you're ready to talk, I say. Not before, but when you are. I leave her there with the card, and whatever she is working through, because I cannot work through it for her, and trying to would be an insult to the intelligence I know she has. The rest of that day is logistics, which is its own kind of medicine. Claire has the guest room ready when we arrive. The bed made in the soft gray linen Brooke has always liked when she stayed over, the window cracked the way Brooke prefers, because she has slept with a window cracked since she was 8 years old and told me once that she couldn't sleep without the sound of outside. There is a new toothbrush on the bathroom counter and a set of clothes in the dresser. Claire anticipated correctly that Brooke would not have a bag. I show Brooke the room. She stands in the doorway for a moment looking at it. The window's open, she says. I know. She looks at me. You remembered. I remember everything, I say. That's also a habit. She goes inside. I close the door softly and stand in the hallway for a moment and think about the list of calls I still need to make. Francis, to confirm next steps on the permanent case. Dr. Camille Torres, the trauma psychologist I have been keeping in my contact list for 6 months, for reasons I hoped would remain theoretical. Andrea Simmons, to report the outcome and coordinate whatever the school's process looks like going forward. Garrett, to provide the written version of everything I gave him verbally. I also think about the pediatric orthopedist consult I am going to request for the healed fracture. a separate evaluation outside the emergency context by someone who can provide a formal assessment for the record. And I think about the note I am going to write tonight, after Brooke is asleep and the house is quiet, adding entry 42 to the document I have been keeping since October. Not because anything happened today that needs documenting. Because the habit of recording what is real, accurately, without gaps, without the softening that makes things easier to live with but harder to act on, is the habit that made tonight possible. I go downstairs. I make coffee that is actually worth drinking. I stand at the kitchen counter and look out at the garden, which is doing what gardens do in early spring. Not yet fully arrived, but clearly on the way. My phone is on the counter. It does not ring in this moment, which is the first moment since 3:17 a.m. that it has not rung or been in my hand. I drink the coffee. I look at the garden. Then I pick up the phone and begin. The 14 days that follow the custody order are the kind of 14 days that look quiet from the outside, and are not. Brooke sleeps for most of the first two. Not the sleep of someone who has given up. The sleep of someone who has been running on adrenaline for 14 months and whose body has finally received permission to stop. I check on her twice each night, the way I checked on post-op patients in the first hours after surgery, not because I expect a crisis, but because the monitoring is the care. She eats. She drinks the coffee I make every morning. She sits on the back porch in the afternoons with a blanket and her phone, the real one, the one no one is monitoring. And I do not ask what she is doing on it because she is 16 years old and her privacy is one of the first things I intend to restore to her. On the third day, she asks if she can call a friend from school. I tell her she can call anyone she wants, anytime she wants, from any room in this house. She looks at me with the expression of someone receiving information that should be ordinary and is not yet. Any room, she repeats. Any room, I say. That's how houses are supposed to work. She goes upstairs. I hear her laughing 20 minutes later. Real laughter, the unguarded kind. And I stand in the kitchen and make dinner and let the sound of it fill the house without comment. Camille Torres arrives for her first session with Brooke on Thursday afternoon. I met Camille 6 months ago at a continuing education conference on trauma response in adolescence. I still attend 2 or 3 medical conferences a year, because I find that the habit of learning is harder to retire than the habit of operating. She is 42, direct, and has the specific quality of someone who asks questions with genuine curiosity rather than clinical procedure. I liked her immediately, which in my experience is a reliable indicator of competence. I introduce them in the living room, and then I leave. Not to the backyard, not hovering near the door. I go to my office on the 2nd floor and I work, because Brooke needs to understand that this space is hers and I am not monitoring it. Camille stays for an hour. When she comes downstairs, I walk her to the door. She's articulate, Camille says. Very self-aware for her age. She's going to do the work. She's always been like that, I say. The environment you've created here in 3 days. She pauses, choosing the word. It's registering. She knows she's safe. That's not automatic. Some kids take months to feel that. She called me at 3 a.m, I say. She knew before she dialed. Camille nods. We'll meet twice a week to start. I'll keep you informed of anything that requires your involvement. Otherwise, what happens in the sessions stays in the sessions. Understood, I say. She leaves. I go back to my office. I add a note to entry 43. First session with Camille. Brooke came downstairs after and ate 2 pieces of the cornbread I made. I'm going to call that a good sign. Marcus Webb is formally charged on day 9. Francis calls me at 7 a.m, and I take the call in the kitchen before Brooke is awake. 2 counts of felony assault causing bodily injury to a minor, 1 count of domestic violence, and 1 count of child endangerment. The DA's office filed yesterday afternoon. Francis's voice carries the specific quality it carries when she has been working towards something and it has arrived. The evidence package submitted by the hospital, James's report, the MUSC second opinion on the fracture pattern, the documented prior healed fracture, was apparently what moved it from misdemeanor to felony territory. The prior fracture, I say. It establishes pattern. One incident is an incident. Two incidents with the same mechanism in the same limb is a pattern. The DA used that framing specifically. I think about a 6-month-old fracture that healed without treatment. I think about Brooke managing that alone, the pain of it, the covering of it, the decision not to say anything to anyone. I file the feeling. What about Diane? I ask. She is not being charged at this time. The DA reviewed her position and determined that her corroboration of Marcus's story at the hospital, while documented, does not meet the threshold for charges given the totality of her circumstances. The investigation found evidence of coercive control consistent with domestic abuse of Diane herself. I absorb this. It is not surprising. It is still complicated. She's a victim too, I say. Not as a defense of what Diane did, as a fact that needs to be in the record. The DA's office sees it that way. She's been referred to a domestic violence advocate and a counselor. Her cooperation with the prosecution will be relevant going forward. Frances pauses. Dorothy, she called my office yesterday. Diane did. She asked about the process for having supervised visits with Brooke, within the terms of the custody order. A beat. I told her it was possible, subject to Brooke's consent and your approval. She said she understood. She didn't push. I stand at the kitchen window looking at the garden. I'll talk to Brooke, I say. I talked to Brooke that evening, after dinner, on the back porch. I do not frame it as a decision she has to make immediately, or ever, on anyone's timeline, but her own. I tell her that her mother reached out. I tell her what Diane asked for. I tell her that the answer can be yes, no, not yet, or not ever, and that none of those answers are wrong and none of them are permanent. Brooke is quiet for a long time. The garden is doing what gardens do in the early evening, the light going softer, the shadows longer, the particular stillness of a yard at the end of a day. Did she ask about me? Brooke says. Or did she ask about the visits? I look at her. She asked about the visits. Brooke nods slowly. It is the nod of someone receiving information that confirms something they already knew and were hoping wasn't true. Not yet, she says finally. Tell her not yet. I'll tell her, I say. We sit on the porch for another 20 minutes without talking, which is one of the things I have always loved about Brooke. She has never needed to fill silence with sound. When she was 7, she used to sit beside me in the garden for an hour and just watch things grow. Most adults cannot do that. She has always been able to. Before she goes inside, she stops at the door and looks back at me. Grandma. Does she know that I said not yet instead of no? I'll make sure she knows, I say. She holds my eyes for a moment, then she goes inside. I sit on the porch a little longer. The garden settles into dark. I think about the difference between not yet and no. How much space lives in those two words? How much possibility? How much of the future remains unwritten inside a pause? The thing I did not plan for, the second unplanned thing of this entire situation, after the discovery of the prior fracture, arrives on day 12 in the form of a phone call from a number I don't recognize. I almost don't answer. I answer. Mrs. Calloway? A woman's voice. Careful. My name is Renata. You won't remember me, but I remember you, I say. 41 entries. You let my granddaughter use your nurse's phone. A pause. That was Patricia. I know. I'm giving you credit anyway. A short sound that might be a laugh. I'm calling because this is slightly outside protocol, but I wanted you to know something. I testified in a custody hearing today. Different case, different family, but the judge was Harmon. She pauses. He asked me, in his chambers before the hearing, about the St. Augustine case. He said the documentation submitted was the most thorough pre-crisis record he had seen from a family member in 14 years on the bench. I am quiet for a moment. He said that the custody petition was granted in 40 minutes, Renata continues, because there was nothing to deliberate. He said usually there is something to deliberate. I kept notes, I say. Mrs. Calloway, you kept a clinical record. There's a difference. Another pause. I work with families in these situations every week. Most of them come to us after, with nothing. They knew something was wrong and they didn't document it, and when the crisis comes, they have their word against his, and sometimes that's enough, and sometimes it isn't. Her voice is careful and precise. What you did, starting in October, before you had any confirmation, just because something registered, I wanted you to know that it mattered, specifically and measurably. I stand in my kitchen and look at the wall for a moment. Renata, I say. The habit came from 40 years of charting patients. I didn't design it for this. No, she says, but you used it for this. That's the part that matters. We talk for another few minutes about nothing in particular. She asks how Brooke is adjusting. I ask about her case today. She says it went well. When we hang up, I stand at the kitchen counter for a long moment with the phone in my hand. Then I open the Notes app on my phone and I add an entry. Day 12. Renata called. Judge Harmon said 40 minutes. I'm going to write that down and leave it here, because I have spent 12 days not letting myself fully arrive at what happened, and I think it is time to acknowledge it. She called me at 3:17. I was there by 3:39. The order was signed by 8:09. 4 hours and 52 minutes from the phone ringing to the paper being signed. That is the number I want to remember. On day 14, Marcus Webb appears for his arraignment. I am not in the courtroom. Frances is. She calls me afterward from the parking structure. I can hear the echo of it in her voice, and gives me the summary in the efficient language she uses when things have gone according to expectation. He pled not guilty, which was anticipated. A trial date was set for 4 months out. His attorney requested bail, which was granted at a level Frances described as high enough to be meaningful. The no-contact order with Brooke was extended and formalized as a condition of release. Dorothy, Frances says, I want you to prepare Brooke for the possibility of testifying. Not immediately, not this week. But it needs to be on the table so it isn't a surprise. I'll talk to Camille first, I say, about timing and framing. That's exactly right, Frances says. That's exactly the right order. I hang up and go to find Brooke. She is at the kitchen table with her history textbook and the yellow highlighter, the same position she was in the first morning she woke up here and came downstairs and ate breakfast at this table, like it was something she had been allowed to do forever. She looks up when I come in. I sit across from her. I tell her about the arraignment in simple, direct language. I tell her about the trial date. I tell her that Frances and Camille will work with her together when the time comes, that there is no decision to make today, and that the only thing that is certain right now is that the legal process is moving in the direction it is supposed to move. She listens. She does not interrupt. When I finish, she is quiet for a moment. He's going to say I'm lying, she says, not a question. He's going to try, I say. His attorney is going to try. That is how this process works. And then what? And then James Whitaker is going to explain what a forced hyperextension fracture looks like. Thomas Park from MUSC is going to explain what a 6-month-old untreated fracture looks like. Renata is going to explain what she documented that night. Ms. Okafor from your school is going to explain the conversation you ended when you saw his car. I hold her eyes. And Frances is going to put all of it in front of 12 people who have never met any of us and ask them to look at it. Brooke is quiet. That's a lot of people, she says. You didn't do this alone, I say. You called me, and I called everyone else. That's how this works. She looks at the table for a moment. Then she looks back up at me. I didn't think anyone would believe me, she says. That's why I didn't call sooner. I hold that for a moment. It is the most important thing she has said since the hospital, and it deserves to be held before it is answered. I know, I say. That's what people like Marcus count on, that the person they're hurting will decide the math doesn't work in their favor. I keep my eyes on hers. The math worked. You called. I came. The math worked. She nods. Once. Slowly. Then she picks up the yellow highlighter and goes back to her history textbook. And I sit across from her at the kitchen table and drink my coffee and let the ordinary, irreplaceable fact of the two of us in the same room fill the space the way it is supposed to, the way it could not for 14 months, the way it will from here. 3 months after the night of the phone call, I am sitting at my desk on the second floor when I hear Brooke laugh at something on her phone in the room down the hall. Not the careful laugh. Not the measured, checking who is listening laugh that I cataloged in entries 11 through 19 during the months when she visited with Marcus present and edited herself in real time. The other kind, the laugh that happens before the brain decides whether it is appropriate, the kind that belongs to a person who is not currently calculating the cost of being heard. I keep writing what I'm writing, but I mark the moment internally, the way I marked moments in surgery when something shifted in the right direction and you did not stop to celebrate, but you registered it, filed it, carried it forward. She is still in therapy with Camille twice a week. The work is not finished. Camille has been clear about that, and I have been clear with Brooke about it, because I believe in accurate prognosis over comfortable reassurance. There are nights when Brooke is quiet, in a way that is different from her natural quiet. The nights when something has surfaced in a session and she is processing it the way the body processes a healing bone. Slowly, from the inside out, in a way that looks like nothing from the outside and is everything from the inside. On those nights I make dinner, and I do not ask questions, and I leave the light on in the hallway. That is the whole of what is required on those nights. I have learned this. Diane came for the first supervised visit on a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the custody order. I had prepared Brooke the way I prepare for procedures, thoroughly, without false comfort, with clear information about what to expect and explicit permission to stop at any point for any reason. Camille and I had discussed the timing together and agreed that 6 weeks was right. Brooke had moved from not yet to okay over the course of 2 conversations, which she initiated both times, which I had taken as the relevant indicator. Diane arrived 8 minutes early. I know because I saw her car from the upstairs window, parked at the curb, and watched her sit in it for 7 of those 8 minutes before she got out. I do not know what she was doing in the car for those 7 minutes. I can make an educated guess. I opened the door before she rang the bell. We looked at each other for a moment on the front steps. My daughter, 51 years old, thinner than she was 14 months ago, wearing the blue cardigan she has had for years that I have always thought makes her look like herself. She looked like someone who had been through something and was still in the early stages of understanding what that something was. "Thank you for letting me come," she said. "Brooke let you come," I said. "Thank her." She nodded. She understood the distinction. Brooke came downstairs 2 minutes later, and I went to my office and closed the door, and I sat at my desk and looked at a journal article I did not read for 90 minutes. When I heard Diane's car start in the driveway, I waited 5 more minutes before I came downstairs. Brooke was at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug, looking at nothing in particular. "How was it?" I asked. She thought about it honestly, which she always does. "Hard," she said. "But okay, I think." "That sounds right," I said. "She cried," Brooke said. "I didn't. Is that bad?" "No," I said. "You've been doing your work. She's just starting hers." Brooke looked at the mug. She said she was sorry. "What did you say?" I said I know. A pause. "Is that enough?" "For today," I said. "That's all today needs to be." She nodded slowly. Then she asked if we could order the Thai food from the place on King Street, and I said yes, and we did. And we ate it on the back porch while the neighborhood went through its Saturday evening routines around us, indifferent and ordinary, and exactly what was needed. Marcus Webb's trial is scheduled for 7 weeks from now. Francis has been building the case with the methodical patience of someone who has never once confused speed with quality. The evidence package is substantial. James's report, Thomas Park's consultation, Renata's intake documentation, the school records Andrea assembled, the 41 entries from my phone, and a formal psychological evaluation of Brooke conducted by a court-appointed clinician whose assessment aligned with Camille's in every material respect. Brooke will testify. She made that decision herself, 6 weeks ago, after a session with Camille and a separate conversation with Francis. She did not ask my opinion before she decided. She told me afterward, which is the correct order, and I told her I was proud of her, which is not something I say often enough, and was entirely true. She said, "I just kept thinking, if I don't say it, it's like it didn't happen." And it happened. I looked at her for a moment. "That's exactly right," I said. "Also," she said, "Francis said my testimony combined with the medical evidence is pretty much airtight." "Francis is rarely wrong," I said. She said pretty much, not completely. "Francis never says completely," I said. "That's how you know she's good." Brooke almost smiled. "You and Francis are the same person," she said. I considered this. "We both keep good notes," I said. "There are things I would do differently. I have already said some of them in conversations with Renata and with Camille and in the honest accounting I do each evening before I close my notebook. But there is one I have not said aloud yet, and I want to say it now, because it is the most important one, and I have been waiting until I had the right language for it. I would have trusted what I felt in October sooner. Not the documentation. The documentation I stand behind. Every entry, every timestamp. I mean the moment before the documentation. The moment when I watched Brooke adjust her sleeve at my kitchen table and I knew, not suspected, not wondered, I knew what that bruise was and what it meant. I knew it in the way that 40 years of looking at bodies teaches you to know things before the confirmation arrives. And I waited. I documented. I built a case. All of which was correct and necessary, and I would do again. But I waited longer than I needed to give her the phone number. I gave it to her in February. I could have given it to her in October. Those 4 months are 4 months I cannot give back, and the fact that the outcome was the same does not make those months not have happened. She managed them. She managed them with a composure that should never have been required of a 16-year-old. I did not cause that. Marcus caused that. But I could have shortened it. That is the thing I carry. I carry it accurately, without excess, without the kind of self-punishment that converts guilt into performance. I carry it as information, as the thing that makes me, going forward, someone who acts on what she knows 1 step sooner than she is comfortable acting. That is the use of a mistake, not to diminish what was done correctly, but to make the next correct thing come faster. I am sitting on the back porch on a Tuesday morning in early spring when Brooke comes outside and sits in the other chair with a bowl of cereal and her phone and the particular unself-consciousness of someone who is genuinely at home in a space. She eats, she scrolls. After a few minutes, she looks up at the garden, which is doing what gardens do in early spring. Everything arriving at once, slightly chaotic, insistently alive. "You need to deadhead those," she says, pointing at the rose bushes along the fence. I look at them. She is correct. I know. "I can do it if you want. Ms. Okafor said I need to log volunteer hours for my service requirement." "Deadheading my rose bushes does not qualify as community service," I say. "It's a service," she says, "and you're a community." I look at her. She looks back at me with the specific expression she has been deploying since she was 4 years old. Perfectly composed, entirely aware of what she just said, waiting to see if it lands. It lands. "Fine," I say. "Log your hours." She goes back to her cereal. I go back to my coffee. The garden continues arriving in its slightly chaotic, insistently alive way. Down the street, a dog barks twice and stops. A car passes. The morning proceeds. In voiceover, I speak directly to whoever is watching. She called me at 3:17 in the morning because she had a number that worked and she believed I would come. That is the whole of it. Everything else, the documentation, the custody order, the charges, the trial that is coming, all of it proceeds from that one fact. She believed I would come. I have been a surgeon, a widow, a mother, and a grandmother. I have made decisions under conditions that most people will never encounter, and I have made them in the time it takes to make them, because that is what was required. But the decision that mattered most in my life was not made in an operating room. It was made on a Sunday in February when I slid a piece of paper across a kitchen table and said, "This is a line only you have. Use it if you need to." She needed to. I came. That is the whole of it. The camera holds on the back porch, the 2 chairs, the coffee cup, the bowl of cereal, the garden arriving in early spring. Fade to black.
보실 거 없는 분들은 레미노아 방송으로 가시면 될 것 같아요. 레미노아가 안 찍혀져 있어요. 자, 레미노아 방송으로 가세요.
네, 오늘도 감사했습니다. 네, 설크로 또 2월달 파이팅 하겠습니다.
금요일날 뵙겠습니다, 여러분들. 자, 앞에 렐레리. 금요일날 뵙겠습니다.
가라이 오빠 어서오세요. 은변 오빠 어서오세요. 고추!